The Texas sun was as relentless as ever that afternoon, but inside the Murphy farmhouse, darkness had settled like dust. In the far corner sat a thin boy, no more than 10 years old, his face serious, his hands calloused from work. Audie Leon Murphy. His eyes didn't hold the carefree light of a child's, they held something heavier, older. His father had left months ago. His mother, frail and tired, was doing her best to hold together a family of 12 children. Food was scarce. Hope was scarcer. While other boys played with wooden toy guns, Audie carried a real rifle. He would disappear into the Texas woods at dawn and come back with rabbits or deer, enough to feed his brothers and sisters for a day. His aim was perfect, his patience endless. He never had the luxury of school books or playtime. Life had enrolled him early in the school of survival, and he was already top of his class. The 1930s were cruel years in America. The Great Depression had left even the strongest men broken. On the radio, people spoke of a madman in Europe, Hitler marching across countries like a storm. To most Americans, it was a distant problem. But to young Audie, something about those stories stirred a restlessness inside him. Maybe it was the idea of fighting for something bigger than himself, maybe it was the chance to escape the hunger and dust of Texas. Either way, he decided, he would be a soldier. The first time he walked into a recruitment office, the clerk laughed. "Son, you barely look 16, the man said, eyeing his short frame. "This is a war, not a schoolyard." Audie met his gaze and said quietly, "Sir, I'm not a boy. I've been fighting to feed my family since I was 12. But rules were rules. He was too small, too young, too light. Rejected. He tried again, this time at the Navy, then the Marines. Rejected again and again. Finally, his mother, knowing how much it meant to him, lied about his age on the documents. The Army accepted him. In June 1942, the boy from Texas became a soldier of the United States Army. The day he left home, his mother hugged him at the train station, her hands trembling as she whispered, "Be brave, my son." He promised, "I will, Mama. I'll make you proud." It was the last time he ever saw her. A few months later, she passed away. When the news reached him during basic training, Audie didn't cry. He just stared into the distance for a long time and said nothing. From that day on, something inside him hardened. At the training camp, other recruits made fun of him. "Hey, shorty. You sure you can carry that rifle?" But when the time came to shoot, Audie hit every target dead center. His sergeant shook his head and said, "Kid, you may be small, but you're dangerous." Audie just smiled. He wasn't there to prove anything to anyone except his mother. By 1943, he was shipped to the front lines in Europe. The heat of Texas was replaced by the mud and fire of Sicily. In letters home to his little sister Corinne, he tried to sound brave. "I'm fine. Still breathing. Everything here smells like gunpowder and death. I think about home a lot. Maybe Mama can see me. I hope so." His platoon called him the Texas Kid. But soon that nickname turned into something else. Audie didn't just fight, he led. He didn't wait for orders when his men were in danger. His courage was quiet, unshakable. The first time he saw a man die was in Sicily. A German machine gun nest pinned down his squad, bullets tearing through trees and stone. Everyone dove for cover, but Audie crawled forward, flanking the position. 3 bullets hissed past his helmet, 1 even grazed it, but he kept going. He tossed a grenade, silenced the gun, and saved his squad. Afterward, His sergeant looked at him and muttered, "That kid's got ice in his veins." Audie didn't think of himself as brave. To him, bravery was just doing what had to be done. But with each battle, he changed. His letters home became shorter, colder. "I used to be afraid of dying," he wrote once. "Now I think dying might be the only way to get some rest." He was only 19, but his eyes looked 40. The boy from Texas was disappearing, replaced by something else, a soldier carved by fire. By 1944, he had fought across Italy and into southern France. His reputation grew with every mission. Commanders sent him where the fighting was hardest. Somehow, he always came back alive. Once, during a firefight, he climbed a hill under machine gun fire to pull a wounded friend to safety. A grenade exploded nearby, throwing him to the ground. When his commanding officer later asked, "Didn't you know that tank would blow any second?" Audie replied calmly, "Yes, sir. But if I hadn't gone, my friend would have died." After that, no one called him the kid anymore. They called him Murphy with respect. But at night, when everyone else slept, Audie lay awake staring at the dark sky. He thought about his mother. About Texas. About the people who would never go home. The war was making him famous among soldiers, but fame meant nothing when ghosts whispered your name every night. By winter 1944, his unit was sent to eastern France. Snow covered the forests, and enemy tanks rumbled in the distance. The men were exhausted, frostbitten, and outnumbered. But there was something different about Audie now. He moved with the calm of a man who had already made peace with death. His comrades said there was a fire in his eyes, something fierce, almost supernatural. He didn't know it yet, but fate was leading him toward a moment that would define his name forever. The place was called Holtzwihr, a small French village buried under snow. There, surrounded by German armor and chaos, Audie Murphy would do something that even legends struggle to describe. For now, he just sat near the edge of the forest, cleaning his rifle under a pale winter moon. The wind was cold, the trees silent. Somewhere, far away, a tank engine growled. Audie looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "Mama, I'm still alive, and I haven't broken my promise." The first flakes of snow landed on his helmet. The war was about to turn colder, bloodier, and far more personal. Baptism by fire. The rain in Sicily fell like smoke, thin and endless, clinging to every helmet and rifle. Mud swallowed boots, rifles jammed, and men learned quickly that war didn't care about anyone's plans. Audie Murphy stepped off the landing craft into that chaos with wide eyes and a heartbeat that refused to slow. The smell of the sea mixed with cordite and fear. Within minutes of landing, the world around him had turned into a battlefield. The first shots he heard were not distant. They cracked like whips over his head, and the man beside him dropped before he even understood what was happening. That moment carved something deep inside him, a line between who he had been and who he would become. The boy from Texas had entered his baptism by fire. Days blurred together after that. He marched through shattered villages and bombed out churches, where the echoes of gunfire replaced the sound of prayers. The soldiers around him joked about going home by Christmas, but Audie knew better. Every night, the enemy crept closer. Every morning, fewer faces lined up for roll call. It didn't take long for him to lose his first friend. His name was Laddie Tipton, a soldier from Tennessee who had once shared his rations with Audie during training. Tipton was laughing about something when the sniper's bullet found him. Audie froze for half a second, then crawled through mud toward the flash of the rifle. He didn't think, didn't plan. He just fired. When the silence came back, the sniper was gone and so was the laughter. Audie sat beside Tipton's body for a long time, staring at the lifeless grin. He whispered, "Rest easy, buddy. I'll handle the rest." That night, he wrote nothing home. The war pushed him forward without mercy. In Italy, the hills were death traps. German artillery fell like thunder, shredding trees and flesh alike. Murphy's squad moved through olive groves and minefields, sometimes fighting for an entire day just to gain a few yards. He learned to tell the difference between a shell wind that would hit nearby and one that would miss by instinct alone. He could read danger in the way birds took off or in the sudden silence before an attack. Once, while moving through a valley, his unit came under machine gun fire from a stone farmhouse. Men dove for cover, but the gunfire pinned them down. Without waiting for orders, Audie crawled through the tall grass, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He slipped behind the farmhouse, lobbed a grenade through the window, and stormed in with his rifle raised. When the smoke cleared, the nest was silent. For that, he received his first Silver Star. When his commander congratulated him, Audie simply shrugged. "Just doing my job, sir." But inside, the job was eating him alive. He had begun to dream of faces he couldn't save, men calling for help that never came. His hands shook sometimes, though never in battle. He stopped writing letters home because there was nothing left to say that wasn't soaked in blood. By 1944, he had been through more than most men see in a lifetime. His courage was becoming legend among his comrades. During the invasion of southern France, he led a charge through a hail of bullets, knocking out 2 enemy machine guns and capturing prisoners single-handedly. His uniform was torn, his boots full of water, his face hardened beyond his years. He didn't flinch, didn't boast, he just kept moving. One of his men once asked him, "Murphy, aren't you ever scared?" He looked up, his expression calm. "Sure. But being scared doesn't stop bullets. Moving does." Each act of bravery added another medal to his chest, but it also deepened the quiet within him. He began to notice the small things that war-destroyed villages turned to dust, children without parents, dogs wandering roads that once led to homes. Sometimes, after a firefight, he'd sit on a fallen wall, staring at the horizon until someone called his name. He rarely smiled anymore. In the French countryside, near a village called Rémichuel, he performed another act that stunned his superiors. His unit was pinned down by German machine guns on a hill. Crawling forward alone, Audie got within throwing range and hurled grenades with precise timing. The explosions tore through the enemy position, and he charged, killing or capturing the survivors. When his squad reached him, the hill was theirs. He had taken it almost by himself. The next morning, a captain handed him a citation for valor. Audie folded it neatly and tucked it into his pocket without looking at it. "Sir," he said softly, "I just don't want to lose any more friends." War had become personal. Every bullet he fired carried the memory of someone he'd lost. Every victory felt hollow. His name was spreading across the division as a symbol of fearlessness, but when he looked in the mirror, he saw nothing heroic, just a tired face and eyes that no longer dreamed. Autumn turned to winter. Snow began to fall over France, covering the destruction like a shroud. Murphy's unit was ordered to push into the Vosges Mountains, a frozen maze of trees and fog. Supplies were low, and the enemy was desperate. It was there that Audie would face his greatest test yet. On a night patrol, visibility barely 10 feet, he moved silently through the forest with 3 men. A sudden burst of gunfire erupted from the dark. 2 soldiers dropped instantly. Audie dug behind a log, returning fire blindly. He crawled toward the sound, using flashes of the enemy's rifles to guide him. When it was over, he stood among the trees, his breath visible in the cold air. His hands were numb, his uniform soaked in blood, not all of it his own. He didn't say a word. The remaining soldier looked at him, pale and shaking. "You're not human, are you?" the man whispered. Audie just walked past him, muttering, "None of us are anymore." By now, his commanders knew they could rely on him for anything. He was promoted quickly, but the rank meant nothing. The faces of his fallen men haunted him. He could still hear Tipton's laugh, still feel the weight of bodies he had dragged out of fire. He wrote in his small notebook, "Medals don't matter. Survival doesn't mean you're lucky, it just means someone else took the bullet meant for you." In December 1944, the snow grew thicker, and whispers of a new German offensive spread like wind. Murphy's company was exhausted, half-starved, but still pushing forward. He no longer thought about home or heroism. He was just trying to keep his men alive, one hill at a time. One night, as he sat by a dying fire, his best friend in the unit asked quietly, "Murph, what'll you do when this is over?" Audie stared into the flames. "If it ever ends," he said, "I'd like to sleep. Just sleep without hearing guns." The next day, orders came for them to hold a position near a small French village Holtzweiler. None of them knew it yet, but that patch of snow and mud would become the place where Audie Murphy would cross the line between man and legend. He lay awake that night, listening to the rumble of distant tanks, feeling the vibration through the frozen ground. The world was silent except for the wind. Audie closed his eyes and whispered, "One more fight. Then maybe peace." The snow kept falling. The inferno at Holtzweiler. The sky above eastern France was the color of steel. Snow covered everything: the trees, the fields, the broken fences. It should have been beautiful, but beauty doesn't belong on a battlefield. For Audie Murphy and his men, the village of Holtzweiler wasn't just another dot on a map, it was survival. They had been ordered to hold the line: no retreat, no surrender. The Germans were gathering just beyond the forest, their engines growling like distant thunder. The men of Company B were exhausted, their faces ghostly under layers of mud and frost. Some hadn't eaten properly in days. Frostbite had turned their fingers blue, but the cold wasn't the worst enemy, the waiting was. Waiting to die always lasted the longest. Audie stood near a half-destroyed farmhouse, scanning the tree line through his binoculars. He could see flashes of movement, helmet glints, the dark shadows of tanks maneuvering behind the ridge. He turned to his radio operator. "They're coming," he said calmly. "And they've brought everything they've got." The first shells landed moments later. The explosions tore through the snow, flinging dirt and men into the air. The sound was deafening. The ground trembled like the world itself was breaking apart. Audie shouted for his men to take cover. They scattered behind trees, ditches, and whatever was left of the farm. Smoke filled the air, visibility dropped to nothing. When the dust cleared enough to see, Audie spotted them: rows of German infantry advancing, supported by tanks. Their black crosses stood out against the snow, their tracks chewing the frozen ground. "Artillery," he yelled into the radio. "We need support now." The reply came back cold and simple, "Negative. Artillery's tied up. You're on your own." A silence hung in the air after that, even louder than the explosions. Audie stared at the radio, then looked at his men. Most were barely standing. He knew if they stayed, they'd be slaughtered. "Fall back to the tree line," he ordered. Set up a defensive line there. The men hesitated. No one wanted to leave their leader behind, but the look in Murphy's eyes said this wasn't a debate. One by one, they retreated, limping and crawling through the snow, clutching their rifles. Audie stayed behind with a few others to cover them. As the Germans closed in, a tank shell exploded near a disabled U.S. tank destroyer sitting in the open field. Flames roared from its engine. Audie saw the machine gun mounted on top, still intact, still loaded. For a moment, the idea felt insane. Then again, war had already redefined insanity. He sprinted through the snow toward the burning wreck. Bullets tore around him, snapping branches, kicking up dirt. The heat from the fire hit his face as he climbed up the side of the vehicle. Smoke burned his eyes, but he pulled himself onto the machine gun mount, gritted his teeth, and opened fire. The gun roared like thunder. Tracers lit up the gray air. Germans dropped one after another, their formations breaking as Audie swept the barrel back and forth. He fired until the gun was red hot, until the smell of gunpowder and burning metal became one. For nearly an hour, he held his ground alone, one man against an army. German tanks rotated their turrets toward him, shells exploding around the destroyer, spraying shrapnel. Every blast could have ended him, but he didn't move. He aimed, fired, reloaded, and fired again. At one point, a shell struck close enough to knock him flat. He rolled off the side, his leg bleeding from shrapnel, but he climbed back up before the next wave came. "Come on, you bastards," he shouted, voice hoarse, defiant. He wasn't fighting for medals anymore. He was fighting because there was no one else left to fight. Through the smoke, he saw the enemy beginning to waver. The once steady march of boots turned to scattered movement. He heard confused shouting in German, saw officers trying to rally their men. Then another burst from his machine gun sent them running. The attack faltered. The tanks turned back. The impossible was happening. The enemy was retreating. Behind him, the radio crackled. His company's commander, thinking he'd been killed long ago, called out, "Murphy, are you still there?" Audie, panting, eyes half blind from smoke, pressed the transmitter. "They're pulling back," he rasped. "But I'm running out of ammo." "Fall back, for God's sake," came the reply. He looked at the flames licking the sides of the tank destroyer, the piles of spent shells around him, and said quietly, "Not yet." When the last round was fired, silence descended. The snow was falling again, slow and delicate, covering the bodies that dotted the field. Audie climbed down, limping through the wreckage, his uniform charred, his hands burned. He met his men halfway back to the woods. They stared at him like he was a ghost. One of them whispered, "How the hell are you still alive?" Audie just said, "I don't know. Let's finish what we started." He regrouped the survivors and led a counterattack. The Germans, already broken, fled into the trees. By the time the smoke cleared, the ground that had seemed lost forever was once again in American hands. When reinforcements arrived hours later, they found Murphy still at his post, rifle in hand, blood seeping through his trousers. The officer who approached him tried to speak but couldn't find words. Finally, he said, "Son, you just stopped a German regiment." Audie wiped soot from his face and replied simply, "They stopped themselves." Then he collapsed. He woke up 2 days later in a field hospital. His ears were ringing, his leg bandaged. The doctor told him he'd lost a lot of blood. A nurse leaned over and said softly, "You're a hero, Mr. Murphy." He turned his head away. "Heroes are the ones who didn't make it," he murmured. The army later calculated that his actions had killed or wounded over 200 enemy soldiers, destroyed 6 tanks, and saved his entire company. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. But when the ceremony came, he stood quietly, staring down at the medal in his hands, as if it belonged to someone else. Reporters wanted stories. The army wanted photographs. The country wanted a symbol. Audie Murphy just wanted silence. Every night after Holtzwehr, he dreamt of fire and snow, of the faces that didn't come back. To the world, he was now a hero. To himself, he was just a soldier who had survived what should have killed him. From hero to haunted star. When the war ended, the world cheered for Audie Murphy. Newspapers called him a legend, generals shook his hand, and cities lined the streets to celebrate his bravery. Yet for Murphy, stepping off the train in New York was not triumph, it was disorientation. The streets were alive with life, with music, laughter, and colors he had long forgotten. But no amount of celebration could erase the battlefield in his mind. He returned to Texas briefly, to a home that felt smaller than he remembered. The farmhouse where he had grown up, the fields where he had run barefoot as a boy, everything was quiet and still. His mother hugged him, tears streaming down her face, but even that warmth was shadowed by a persistent ache he couldn't name. Murph, as his friends still called him, looked out across the horizon, half expecting shells to explode and the screams of men to fill the air. Publicly, he was a hero. He received letters from admirers, invitations to speak, and offers from publishers and Hollywood producers who wanted to capture his story. Audie obliged at first, recounting battles and camaraderie. But each retelling scratched at old wounds. He began to notice the quiet tremors in his hands, the inability to sleep without nightmares of gunfire, snow, and the men who had died under his watch. Hollywood arrived like a tidal wave. Studios wanted the American soldier on screen, and Audie fit the role perfectly, handsome, strong, modest, and with the real-life experience that made him magnetic. He was cast in films portraying war heroes, often characters not unlike himself. Cameras clicked, scripts were memorized, lights blazed hot, and he became a star almost overnight. Yet fame was a paradox. In front of the lens, he was confident, commanding, a symbol of courage. Behind it, he was haunted. Audie would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, reaching for imaginary rifles or ducking from invisible explosions. He often refused to sleep with doors closed, terrified of being trapped or ambushed. Alcohol and cigarettes became companions for a time, small instruments to quiet the memories that played like a continuous film. Despite the turbulence, he threw himself into work. Writing his memoir was cathartic, it allowed him to control the narrative of his life in a way that the battlefield never had. He described the camaraderie, the fear, the adrenaline, and the cost of survival. But the public never understood the shadows behind the medals, the invisible wounds that no therapy could erase at first. Audie was restless. He craved purpose beyond the silver screen. Charitable work, speaking engagements, visits to veterans' hospitals, these were the few moments he felt connected to something real. Each handshake, each tearful veteran he comforted, reminded him why he had survived when so many others hadn't. Still, the weight of memory pressed relentlessly against him. The war had gifted him courage, but it had also taken something equally vital, innocence. He never married casually, never allowed himself the easy comforts many of his peers enjoyed. His relationships were deep but fraught with the shadows of what he had endured. Women admired him, friends trusted him, yet few could truly grasp the storms inside. In interviews, he deflected questions about fear and trauma. "I did what I had to," he would say, voice steady, eyes calm. But off camera, he sometimes lingered on battlefields in his mind, walking through snow, dirt, and smoke, revisiting the moments at Holtzwehr that had defined him. In those memories, he was both unstoppable and broken, a paradox only he could inhabit. As the years passed, the public began to see him less as a man and more as a symbol, Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier of World War II. Statues would eventually bear his name, schools would teach his story, books and films immortalized his heroics. But immortality didn't mean peace. Every night, the medals he wore so proudly during ceremonies felt heavy. They were reminders not only of valor but also of loss, of the invisible debt he carried to the men who had fallen. Murphy sought balance through his art. Acting became a discipline, almost meditative. He loved westerns. The wide-open landscapes mirrored the freedom he had lost in the war, a freedom beyond death and chaos. Yet, even in front of the camera, the war whispered in every shadow, every silence. Directors often remarked on his intensity, not knowing it was the battlefield echoing inside him. In quieter moments, he returned to Texas, walking the land where he had first learned resilience and hard work. Horses, fences, sunsets, they offered a brief escape, though the war was never far. He would sit on the porch at night, staring at the stars, remembering friends he couldn't forget, wondering if he had survived for a reason or merely by chance. The public rarely saw his vulnerability. Audie Murphy became a cultural icon, the embodiment of courage under fire, the American soldier who defied impossible odds. Children waved at him, veterans saluted, and journalists chronicled every aspect of his life. Yet inside, he remained vigilant, always ready, always aware, carrying the weight of history and memory on his shoulders. Tragically, this vigilance would follow him to the end. On May 28, 1971, while flying in a private plane over Virginia, the aircraft crashed, and Audie Murphy died instantly. The nation mourned. Tributes poured in from every corner: military leaders, fellow actors, ordinary citizens. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, a testament to his bravery, a symbol of sacrifice, a life celebrated and yet cut tragically short. Even in death, Murphy's story remained complicated. He was a hero who had survived unimaginable terror, a star who had fascinated audiences, and a man who had quietly battled ghosts the rest of the world could not see. His legacy is not just medals or movies, it is the enduring reminder of the human cost of war, of courage that carries unseen scars, and of a man who faced both the enemy and himself, never flinching, even when the battle within was fiercest. Audie Murphy's life after the war was a mirror of his battlefield experience, dazzling, dangerous, and profoundly human. Fame and valor could never erase the quiet pain of memory. He lived in two worlds simultaneously, one celebrated, one haunted, until the day the skies took him, leaving the world with stories of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring truth that even heroes are never unbroken.